Hey, welcome to Journey Online. So glad you're with us. We're in the middle of a series called Everyday Heroes. It's just talking about people that we look at in the Bible or in real life who are just everyday. They're not marquee players. They're just people who made a difference in their world, and we're learning from them so that we can be the same kind of people. One of the things I've noticed as we've looked at them each week, this is just my takeaway, is that everyday heroes recognize things that other people overlook. It's just one of the qualities that's consistent through everyday heroes. When you think in your life, the people who've had the biggest impact on you, this will be true of them, guaranteed. They notice things that other people overlook. Our ability to notice things is a big part of living a really best life. Today we want to move into Jesus' life. Jesus walked around for 33 and a half years, and then at the very end of his life, everything turns upside down. As most people who have been around church at all, or even if you haven't, it's hard to not at least know this little bit of Jesus' life. There were thousands of people, huge crowds of people who loved him and followed him. There were huge crowds of people that didn't. There were some that hated him, especially a bunch of religious people that were completely against him. There were also people who just avoided him and didn't know what in the world to do with it. There were all kinds. There were political people, there were religious people, there were non-religious people, there were Jews and there were Gentiles and everywhere in between. Everybody had an opinion, and it showed up in Jesus' life. Well, finally, he gets arrested on some made-up mock charges, taken through the court and political system, and finally he ends up standing before this guy named Pilate. Pilate had the power to do thumbs up and live or thumbs down and die. Pilate was an absolute coward, by the way. If he were here, I would tell him that right now. Pilate was a guy, matter of fact, let's just look at where he landed. Pilate reached a point where he heard everything, and he kind of went back to people and said, he may be a kook, he may be weird, I'm not into all of his stuff, but he doesn't deserve to die. And the religious people were so angry, they just said, crucify him. So Pilate finally, in his cowardly act, he just washes his hands and he goes, this isn't on me. But he makes this statement. Pilate sentenced Jesus to die. Then he throws this in at the end as they demanded. I'm not wanting to do it, but if that's what you say, we'll let it happen. What a coward. He didn't believe it should, but he wasn't going to stop it. He didn't believe it enough to lose some polling points with people. And so he allowed it to happen that day. So they took Jesus, they beat Jesus, they put him on a cross. That's the scene where we pick up right here. It said, while Jesus is hanging there, two other criminals were led out to be executed with him. And when they came to a place called the Skull, they nailed him to the cross. And the criminals were also crucified, one on his right, one on his left. So in the middle of our setting, we've got Jesus, the guy who didn't deserve anything bad to happen to him, that Pilate was too big a coward to defend. And now on his left, he's got somebody. On his right, he's got somebody. And then this most bizarre of all situations, one of the criminals hanging beside him scoffed. So he's hanging there. There's people all down here crying, weeping in agony over this. There's also a bunch of people mocking him and gambling for his clothes. And they're saying ridiculous things to him, making fun of him. This guy joins in. He said, so you're the Messiah, are you? Snarky much? Yes. Prove it by saving yourself. As long as you're doing that, and us too. Hey, I've got an idea, Mr. Messiah. Why don't you save you and us and everybody else, and then let's go to dinner. Why don't you save us too while you're at it? So Jesus is already going through all this. Now he's getting mocked by a criminal who deserved to die, who is dying. I mean, as if that's not a bad enough situation. What a bizarre situation, but to make it even weirder, check this out. But the other criminal protested. Now, while dying on crosses, there's an argument going on. But the other criminal said, don't you fear? Maybe we'll call the one on the left lefty because he was on the left. We'll call this guy righty. Don't you fear God even when you've been sentenced to die? We deserve to die for our crimes, but this man hasn't done anything wrong. So now he's looking back over here going, what's wrong with you, fool? Don't you get it? We deserve this. This guy hasn't done anything. What's the matter with you? Well, he's a criminal that deserves to die, is what was the matter with him, just in case you were wondering. But they're having an argument. Jesus has not uttered a word. Well, righty isn't finished. He says that to the criminal. Now look what he says to Jesus. Then he said, Jesus, remember me. What an incredible thought. Remember me, but he uses some more language, when you come into your kingdom. Remember me would be like, hey, when you die, just remember there was somebody pulling for you. There was somebody in it with you. There was somebody that stood up to them. There was somebody who wasn't such a coward like Pilate or like the idiot across the way. But he didn't just say that. He said, when you come into your kingdom. Kingdom is a word that's reserved for kings. You know what he's saying is that I believe you are who you say you are. I believe you are the Messiah. I believe you are the sent one from God. I believe. It's a faith statement. Remember me is a request. Into your kingdom is an admission that I accept who you are as who you are, just like what you've said. What a weird day. Everything that's happened totally off the charts. And now this guy says, I believe. What an incredible turn of events. Everybody does something. Pilate, the way he dealt with Jesus is he just avoided an answer. Well, then it comes to Lefty, and he just rejected it. I ain't buying none of that. Hey, why don't you do a little trick or two? Here's the crazy reality. Both of them ended up with the same decision, was rejecting. Pilate said, I'm not going to reject, I'll just avoid. But see, no decision is a decision. To say, I'm not going to make a decision on Jesus at all, well, that is a decision. It's a decision not to follow. It's like saying, do you want tacos or do you want pizza? Well, I'm not going to make a decision. Well, not making a decision is a decision you're not going to eat either. And for Pilate, that's what he did. They have the same result as one avoided, one rejected, but righty accepted who he was. It's this beautiful moment in time when no one have ever dreamed or suspected that somebody looks over to the Messiah and says, the reason you came was to save people far from you, to heal those who were most needy, and here's another to add to your list, I'm in. Would you remember me? Jesus' response was amazing. And Jesus replied, he could have said a million words, nothing better than this, I assure you. Not maybe, not let me think about it, we'll see how this plays out. I assure you, and then he gives him this word, today you will be with me in paradise. How weird is that? How great is that? Would you remember me? The answer was yes, not yes, absolutely yes. And then he said something to him that almost nobody ever experiences. He said, today you will be with me. Today. This person hanging on the cross is this beautiful example because in the moment is a real thing. That a person can become a follower of Jesus in the moment. The Bible says if we believe in our heart that Jesus is who he is, says he is, and that God has raised him from the dead, and if we acknowledge with our mouth that we will be saved in a moment. It's kind of what we call spiritual birth. Just like there's a birth for humans, there's a birth for us spiritually. And it is in that moment. This guy didn't need to learn 12 verses or go through a class. He didn't need to walk somewhere on glass. He didn't need to get 14 things out of his life. In that moment, Jesus said, you know what? You have done exactly what I would expect from you. You have acknowledged that I am who I say I am, and you have placed your trust in me for your future. I will do exactly. What an incredible thing. That's my story too, by the way. There was a time in my life where I accepted that Jesus was who he said. I acknowledged my need for a Savior. And I gave verbal assent to that just to say, God, if you would have me, I would be so honored. Would you be my God? It's an amazing thing. But it happened so weird for him because that was all the beginning of his story and the end. This day, today, for most of us, it doesn't work out like that at all. As a matter of fact, for most of us, it works out like this. We reach a point in our life where we say, I believe. I accept you as Savior, as God. I believe. I have faith that would lead me toward that. And that's great. And we talk about that a lot in church. Another thing that Christians love to talk about is our forever. It's what he said, today you'll be with me in paradise. That's your forever. You can be assured of this. You can be assured of that. That's the great stuff. Well, for our guy, that was his whole story. It was, I believe, and forever, because it was all that day. For most of us, that's not the way life works, because most of our life is lived right in the middle of those two things. In church, we love to talk about belief, and we love to talk about someday in heaven, and we're all going to be good, and there'll be no more tears, and it's going to be awesome. There'll be no more frizzy hair. There'll be no more ice cream with calories in it. There's going to be all this good stuff. It's the best thing ever, ever, ever. But we live our life right here in this messy middle between belief and forever, between belief and heaven. There is this reality of right now in the middle, and that's where I want us to focus, because everyday heroes figure out how to love this and live in this in a healthy way. It is something that is possible, but not something that is obvious. And that's what we have to latch onto if we're going to keep learning as we go. It is a big deal. As we move forward, if you kept reading that same passage, you would find that they put Jesus in a tomb, and 3 days later, he was resurrected. He resurrected himself. He came out of that grave. And some people went and recognized it. Some women did, and they went and told, and then some men, they don't ever believe the women, so they went and then everybody kind of went freaky weird, and they were telling everybody, and there were people saying, I bet I know what happened, I bet I know, and then people making up stories and writing them in the paper, all this crazy stuff going on. If you just keep going down a few verses later, this is where we find ourselves. That same day that they realized he had risen from the dead, that same day, two of Jesus' followers were walking to the village of Emmaus. Where's Emmaus, you ask? Well, I'm glad you asked. It was 7 miles from Jerusalem. Now, I know we don't do a lot of 7-mile walks, but from Jerusalem to Emmaus, about 7 miles. So let's just say if you walk 3 miles an hour, you got 2.5, 3 hours. But you'll be there in 3 hours. It's hot. You may want to slow down and rest a little bit. Who knows? I don't think they did as much as we might, or as much as I might. Let's put it that way. They're on their way to the village, and it gives us a little description. As they walked, they were talking about everything that had happened. Well, as followers of Jesus, that's all they've been doing for a few days. The guy we were following, who was going to be the king and set up a kingdom, got killed. And then they freaked out over that. And how do you follow a king who can't keep himself alive? And then all of a sudden, now he has risen. Could this be true? Could this be God? Could this be people political? Could this be who knows? And they're walking to Emmaus. They're 2 or 3 hour walk, and they're talking about all this because that's all anybody's talking about. And right in the middle of that story, as they talked and discussed these things, Jesus himself suddenly came and began walking with them. Little added note, side note, but God kept them from recognizing him. So they're walking along, and all of a sudden this guy shows up, and they're like, what's up, dude? What's up? What's up? Hey, how's it going? And then I love the fact that we get the ins and outs of the conversation, because look at this. He asked them, what are you discussing so intently as you walk along? What are you guys talking about? He just lands right there by them. They're like, hey, who are you? Hey, you know, what are you guys talking about? And then we get this answer. This is a great answer. They stopped short, sadness written all across their faces. And then one of them, Cleopas, we'll call him Cleo because his name is Cleopas, so we're going to call him Cleo. He replied, you must be the only person in Jerusalem who hasn't heard about all the things that have been happening there over the last few days. This Mr. Sarcasm, Cleo, evidently has his degree in sarcasm. And he looks at Jesus, doesn't know he's Jesus, but he looks at this guy, and the guy goes, what are you talking about? He goes, what are you, stupid? You got to be like the only human being in this part of the world that doesn't know everything that's been going on. And he begins to lay it out for Jesus, and then Jesus, if you just keep reading the next few verses, he asks him some more questions. Jesus, because he's Jesus, is really good at this stuff. And Jesus starts saying, I'm a little bit surprised that you're a little bit surprised. Didn't you expect this to happen? All the way back in Moses' writings, it talked about when the Messiah comes, he will be crushed that things are going to happen and it is part of God's plan. Why are you so surprised by this? And he kind of, as they're walking along the way from Jerusalem to Emmaus, in the heat and on the dirt road with little sandals and robes, he's explaining, don't be surprised, because here's what Scripture said, and here's what it said, and this only makes sense, and maybe you should have thought of this, and maybe this would help you. He just teaches them this little lesson while they're walking. And then by this time, they were nearing Emmaus at the end of their journey. And so they're peeling off to go to Cleo's house. And Jesus kind of starts that direction. It says Jesus acted as if he were going on, but they begged him, stay the night with us since it's getting late. So this just day, hey, what's up, guy? Oh, whoa, what are you talking about? How can anybody not know? And then Jesus lays out all of this stuff. And then they head home, and he's heading that way, and they say, hey, dude, don't leave. This has been great. It's getting late. Hey, come to my house. Come hang out with me. And he does. So Jesus, whoever else was with Cleo, and Cleo go to Cleo's house. And then it just keeps giving us a story. This is so good. It says, so he went home with them. And as they sat down to eat, where are they sitting down to eat? At the table in Cleo's house. Let me just stop right there before we go any further. Hey, when you invite God into your life, when you invite Jesus into your life, by the way, what a lot of us want to do is sit him on the front porch or in the back swing or over on the side of the house. When Jesus is invited in, he likes to come into our kitchen, into our home, into where we live. He wants to be right in the middle of things, because that's where life happens. Well, that's what happened as they sat down to eat. He took the bread. Stop for a second. He who? Whose house is it? Cleo. He who? Jesus. This is something weird. He went to somebody else's house. They get to the table and sit down. Jesus grabs the bread. See, that's not the way it usually works. The person who owns the home would serve the people. The person who owns the home would say, here, let me get this started. Not in this case. Jesus took the bread and he blessed the bread. And then he broke it and gave it to them. This has got to be weird as these guys are sitting there. The guy they just met a few minutes ago, who's been walking with them, they've washed their hands, sat down. He's now acting as the one in charge. He is the one who took it. He is the one who blessed it. And he is the one who broke it and gave it to them. By the way, I think this is the way life happens for a lot of us. I think it is very easy for us when we come into life and we recognize that God has come into our life and we try to decide what the parameters are. And when God takes our life and he blesses our life, for most of us, we're like, yeah, I'll take that. More of that. I like it when he takes and blesses my things. But the problem is sometimes he begins to break things up in our life, and that's where a lot of us punt. That's where a lot of us start praying prayers to say, God, how could you let this happen to me? Why would you do this to me? How could you not fix that for me? I ask you and you haven't. Do you still love me? If you are really God, why don't you? But here's the crazy thing. When God comes in, he takes and he blesses, and we love all that, but often he breaks things up, because do you know where God shows up in our lives is in that messy middle part. In the messy middle part. That is such a big deal. You know what Jesus said to Righty, the guy on the cross? He said to him, this day you will be with me. And that's pretty miraculous. But you know what's more miraculous, and what he showed for Cleo and his friends and his family? That's not what he says to us. When we come to him in belief, he doesn't say, this day you'll be with me. He says, this day I'll be with you. And that's even more miraculous. I will come to where you are. I will be in the middle of your storm. I will be in the middle of your mess. I will take, I will bless, and I will break, because I have a plan for you, and my plan for you is better than your plan for you. You may not always understand it, but somewhere between I believe and you're forever, that I am with you right in the middle, and I am taking you where you need to go, and I am doing for you exactly what needs to be done. Here's the crazy thing. It's easy to trust him enough to invite him in and receive his blessings, but it's difficult when things get broken. And for most of us, that is a big dividing line. And maybe where you are right now, you're frustrated with God because it doesn't seem like things are playing out the way you want. Or maybe it's just in one element of your life and you keep going, God, why? God, why? God, why? And what he would say to you is, I am with you. You trust me. If you trust me enough to believe in me and trust me enough forever, then trust me in your now. You know what? Everyday heroes have the ability to recognize that God is with me in the middle of my stuff and to trust him. They recognize things that other people often don't notice. Can you imagine what our lives would look like, how different they would be if we fully believed he is with us? Not believed, like believed. If we were convinced that whatever I'm going through, that God is right in the middle of it with me, can you imagine how much that would change our lives? There was a guy named Peter in the Bible that walked with Jesus. One day, Peter's out in the middle of a lake where Jesus has sent him already, and things go upside down. He's in the middle of the storm, and he sees someone over there, and he goes, I think that's Jesus. Matter of fact, he calls out to him and says, if that's you, would you request that I come? And Jesus is like, bring it. And Peter gets out of the boat and walks toward Jesus. Storm all around him. His focus is on the one who is with him. As he looks around and realizes how big the waves, how big the storm and all that, he begins to sink. And you know what Jesus does? Because Jesus is with him, he reaches down and he rescues him again and puts him back in the boat. You know why? Because that is what it's like when God is with us. It doesn't mean he won't let there be storms. It doesn't mean that things won't get broken. It just means that he is with you. And if he is with you, where you are is okay. It's okay. In the Bible, Jesus never said, I am the great I was. And Jesus never says, I am the great I will be. But he does say, I am the great I am. And it is because he is the God in today's world who is with you and with me. And as long as he is with me or I am with him, then my life is in a good spot. He didn't say to Righty, he said, hey, today you will be with me. And to every one of us, when Jesus ascended, he said, lo, I am with you, even to the end of the earth. Man, what an incredible, can you imagine what life, how I would deal with my relationships differently if I just knew for sure he's in control and he is with me? How my finances, how my job, how my career, how my family, how my physical stuff. Can you imagine? I don't know if you've ever believed anything that strongly, but if you were completely convinced that God is with you, what would you not do? What would you ever fear? The problem is often there are so many things going on around us that are broken. There's so many wind. There's so much wind, so many waves, that sometimes it's just hard to remember that. Well, the story doesn't finish there. I think it's kind of fascinating. It says suddenly their eyes were open. They're sitting with him at the table. He breaks the bread, blesses the bread, breaks the bread, gives it to them. Suddenly their eyes were open and they recognized him. And at that moment, he disappeared. They finally go, oh, here's what they said, oh my God. Literally. Original OMGs. They finally recognized who he was. And then, hey, listen, that's all they needed in that moment, and then he was gone. He disappeared from them. Sometimes I think those of us who are adults don't understand things as well as kids do. I saw this scenario in the last few weeks, and it was this family kind of on vacation. They rent some bikes, and they're kind of in this little resort town, and they're going to ride their bikes to go eat dinner, except they have an argument, because this is what people do when they're on vacation. Kind of have an argument because one of them's like, no, it's going to rain, and then the other one's like, no, it's not, it's going to be fine. Let's take the bikes. It'll be so cool. It's like a family memory. And so they're riding their little bikes to the restaurant to go eat, and about halfway there, it's just maybe a 5, 10, 15-minute ride. Halfway there, it starts pouring rain. So now they're mad. They're like, I told you it was going to rain. Well, it wasn't supposed to rain. And they're frustrated and they're wet and they're thinking about how do you go in now looking like this, or how do we go back on? This is ridiculous. And they look and there's a puddle up in front of them and they're frustrated and they're trying to figure out how to get around it. And at that point, their son comes riding around with a smile as big as his entire face. And he's like, this is epic. And he sees the puddle in front and he is speeding toward it. I think it's so easy sometimes for some people to recognize what other people don't. I think for some of us, we spend our whole life trying to avoid the rain or the puddle because we know it's just going to be more complicated, it's going to be more difficult. I think sometimes to understand that God sends me right through the middle of those things because He has something He is doing in my life, something He's doing in my world. What would it be for you in your world? If you could fully recognize Him, that He is with you. And when the puddle is your career or your job and you work with a bunch of crazy people, or it feels so overwhelming, or it feels so out of control, or it feels like maybe not what you're supposed to be doing, if you could just ride toward that puddle with the confidence that I don't know what God's up to, but I know He's up to something because He's with me, how would you treat that differently? I'm afraid so many of us make decisions that go until we can get past the puddles, till we can get past the storms, till we can get past this, that, or the other. I won't find happiness. I won't find peace. I won't find contentment. And I think what Jesus comes in the middle of the storm to say to all of us, what Jesus, when things are a little bit broken, is what He would say is, your life is not just yours, it's mine, and I have blessed it, and I will be with you, and I may be taking you through that relationship and through that career change and through that health stuff. I am with you, and I will bring good from it because I am God. And when we can recognize Him for that, here's the crazy thing. I can find peace and contentment and satisfaction even in the middle of the crazy. Wouldn't that be a great way to live? That is what happens with everyday heroes. Well, this wraps things up for these guys. They said to each other, didn't our hearts burn? Jesus, they recognized who He was. Now He's gone. Didn't our hearts burn within us as He talked with us on the road and explained the Scriptures? Man, I felt completely alive when I was with that guy. I felt, hey, their world was still upside down. They didn't have everything fixed. In that moment, have you ever felt that way? That things are just okay? Have you ever been in that relationship with God where you were just that on fire? For most of us, if you ever have, it's what we talk about when we look back, not when we're right where we are. Wouldn't it be great to be living so aware that God is with us that our hearts just burn? And when we see broken people, we would see the potential that God put them and that maybe God's working in our life to be a part of their plan. And when our families aren't working out the way we think they should and we're scared to death and we don't know what to do, we would just say, I don't know what to do, but He does, and He is with me, and He cares about them too, and He cares about me, and I will let my heart burn from within for what He is doing in me, and I will trust that that will do something to help the people around me. It is the way we're supposed to live. It's the way we can live. And then this is the last verse. And within the hour, they were on their way back to Jerusalem. One of the things you notice about everyday heroes is that everyday heroes recognize that God is with them in the middle of their stuff, and then they live like it. They can't be still. These guys heard all that. It doesn't even say they ate their dinner. It just said within the hour. They were walking back. Hey, it was almost dark. We know it's at least 2 or 3 hours walk back, but it didn't matter. They were like, we have to tell everyone that Jesus was with us. And it is the way we're supposed to live. It is why we're on this earth, that we can experience God with us and then live like it. We tell everyone, you don't understand. My life's not perfect. My life's not anything. I'm not your example, but you know what? I'm experiencing peace in my life, not because things are all good, but because God is with me. And He's enough. Whether you were righty on the cross and you believed and God took you immediately, or if you're like the rest of us, where we can believe and our forever is out there somewhere, and in the middle we're stuck with all the things that are left. Wherever you're stuck, if you're stuck with God with you, it is a good place to be. Let's live like it. before this day or tomorrow is out, you're going to face something that feels like, why are you breaking my bread? And Jesus' words to you and Jesus' words to me is, I have taken you, I have blessed you, and whatever is broken, here's my promise, I am with you, and that's enough. So God, help us roll around in that truth. For the people watching today that are hurting the most, that are struggling, that are disillusioned, that are frustrated, that are angry, that are hurt, whatever word would fit most, would they feel in this moment what everyday heroes feel, is the fact that you are with us, and would they aim not just around the puddle or away from the rain, would you help us aim at the target and trust that you will see us through, and we will tell everybody around. When you show up in the way that only you can, we ask it in your name. Amen. Hey, what about that righty and our good friend Cleo, two everyday heroes? Have a great week.